Hi there, I'm Jane Turner from writewithjane.com. And if you've followed any of my authors in conversation sessions, you would have heard me say more than once that I work with some truly amazing people. And I'm here to tell you that Dr. Anita Campbell is no exception. I think you'll be blown away when you hear what she had to go through to get to the bottom of some health issues that she was having herself. So I want to welcome you and welcome Dr. Anita Campbell.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for all your support as well, because without you, I wouldn't have gotten this book into this format, which is amazing. So basically, I am a GP. I was a nurse before that. I always wanted to be a doctor. I love medicine. I love people. I love science. I had my own practice in Western Australia where I saw lots of patients. I was the principal of the practice, so I was in charge of everything, all the staff, and it was going really well. And unfortunately, all of a sudden at the start of 2019, I just suddenly had this horrible feeling in my feet, which is sort of like pins and needles. So what we call in medicine, peripheral neuropathy. And it very quickly went up my legs and up into my back over the course of about 2 weeks. That was obviously very scary for me. And I can only describe it as the feeling of when you get pins and needles, but the pins and needles are going away. So it's that horrible in-between feeling where you just want to shake it out and you can't get rid of it. And that feeling I had was for a good, 24 hours a day. I didn't get any relief. It was obviously worse at night, just because I was focusing on it more. I went to one of my GP colleagues who worked in my actual practice, and she did some blood tests and found that I had really low B12. And at that point, I'd never really even needed to have blood tests. I've been pretty well most of my life, except for having babies. And it turned out that my B12 was the lowest that the neurologist had even ever seen, which was a bit of a shock. So I went straight away to the neurologist literally that day. And he said that level of B12 has probably caused a permanent spinal cord injury, and that these symptoms are probably not going to go away, which was devastating news, obviously, to me. But I was on a B12 supplement regime, and I quickly had to have injections every day, and then weekly, and then monthly. But for some reason, the B12 would just never go up. And he was really stumped and couldn't understand why, because most people that have B12 injections get a really high level and they can live with that, and they just have to keep having them. So we did a few other investigations to make sure there wasn't anything going on with the actual gut, and that I wasn't not absorbing it. And he basically left me with it and said, well, this is it for you now, and you need to learn to live with this. And didn't really give me any further, hope or investigations or anything like that. I then obviously struggled with the symptoms, went back to my GP multiple times saying that I couldn't cope. I was really struggling. My work-life balance was out of whack, and was told over and over again to just live with it. Then I started to get some really severe cognitive symptoms. So, and that's why I'm having trouble with words now, because I'm still not quite resolved in that sort of sense. But I started to have problems with concentration. I started to have problems with confusion. I had balance issues. I was holding, and I still do this, gripping the floor with my toes just to stand up. And just basically not being able to cope. And at the end of the day, I had to just close my practice. During all of this, I did go back to the doctors, and different doctors as well, not just one, multiple times. And they all said it was in my head, and that I was too stressed, and that I just needed to make my life easier. And every time I said, look, I went through medical school with 3 young children. I had a baby in the middle of medical school, and that is stressful. And, you know, I've had lots of stressors in my life. I've had grief, I've had loss, I've had trauma, and none of those things had caused me to have these debilitating physical symptoms. So it was very frustrating. And then I started to think it was all in my head, because obviously if everybody's telling you you're crazy and it's in your head and you're manifesting this, you start to think, where am I headed? Because it was just getting worse and worse. I thought I was going to have a bad car accident. I ended up closing my practice. I went from working full-time to 2 days a week, barely coping with that, and went to another neurologist who had the exact same explanation for me, which was, you know, the leg stuff is probably permanent because of this spinal cord injury, but the confusion and all of the cognitive stuff just seems to be manifested as stress from the leg stuff. And I just couldn't accept it. And as a doctor myself, I felt like we hadn't really done much. We hadn't really looked into why, you know. And I got to the point where I was bruising really easily. I was having night sweats. My immune system was compromised. So I ended up going to a hematologist, and he, nearly on the first day I met him, told me that I had blood cancer and sent me for a PET scan, which showed quite significant bone marrow inflammation, and then a bone marrow biopsy, again, with the sort of differential diagnosis of blood cancer. That bone marrow biopsy came back inconclusive, which is pretty much, that's what I should have called my book, actually, inconclusive. But and then he basically just said, well, let's just see what happens. And again, I was just thinking, you know, what is the future for me? I then actually stopped work altogether. But during this time, thankfully, I met a beautiful integrative GP, and she sat down, listened to the whole story. And the first thing she said to me was, you absolutely should not have to live with these symptoms, because we need to work out what's going on. And then the second thing she said to me was, I think you've got a heavy metal poisoning. And that had never even crossed my mind. In medicine, especially in Western medicine, we, you know, deny in terms of a lot of toxins and things that can make you sick that we just have in our bodies without sort of questioning. And she asked me to go to a biological dentist because I have a lot of metal fillings in my mouth. And so it took a while because they're hard to get into. There's not many of them. But by the time I saw him, he looked in my mouth and was just shocked. He said, oh my gosh, not only is this probably a mercury issue, you actually have a battery in your mouth. So what had happened, and I put the pieces together afterwards, was 3 weeks before the feet symptoms started, I actually had a bridge put in, and that was to replace a tooth that was missing. And so that part of that bridge had some metal on it that attached to the other tooth, so that the actual new tooth was floating. And that metal that he'd put with that bridge was actually in constant contact with one of my mercury fillings. And so if you know anything about basic science, you need two metals, you need a positive and a negative, and you need some electrolytes or a saliva acidic sort of environment. So he did a test to see if there was an electric current coming from this battery, and it was 77 microvolts. So 77 microvolts in my mouth being produced for 3 years. And he explained to me that every single one of my symptoms could be explained by this particular event or thing. And I did research pretty much the moment I left his office and found that T cell and B cell lymphocytes are definitely affected by what they call oral galvanization. So oral galvanization is the actual medical term for having an electric current produced in the body that shouldn't be there, and everything. So the mercury actually displaces B12. So that explains why the B12, even though I was having so much B12 supplements, it explains why it was never going up in my blood, because the mercury was constantly being leached and constantly grabbing onto it and taking it away. So obviously straight away I had the battery removed. I haven't had the mercury fillings removed yet because I'm too scared, because I don't want any more mercury leaching into my body, but that is definitely in the plan. So at the end of the day, I'm hopefully on the road to recovery, but I did have a consult with my hematologist yesterday, and the bone marrow hasn't improved. So there is potential for this to progress on, unfortunately, to a blood condition. But hopefully through everything that I've done with the book, I'm going to be able to work on, being more healthy, using more integrative medicines, looking at detoxing and that sort of thing. So that's the very short story of why I wrote the book. But the actual book isn't just about that. And it's actually a very small part in it, because I wrote most of it before I even found out about the battery. So because I thought I was going mad, I wanted to look at all the different things that can make you sick. So I needed to explore, why are doctors telling people that it's in their head? Why and how is this acceptable? And is it in people's head? Because I have lots of patients with chronic disease and chronic pain and chronic issues, and we don't know what's wrong with them, and they do want an explanation. And I certainly have never, as a doctor, said to somebody, it's in your head, as a phrase. But I think a lot of, I think what they're meaning to say is, what's going on in your life that could contribute to inflammation, stress, things that can make your immune system not so strong, all those sorts of things. So in the book, I basically go through medicine, and I explore modern day medicine. So that's about the first 1/3 of the book. And I look at all of the challenges, things like having 10-minute appointments, not being able to see doctors regularly, the same doctor, and what is it about the system that's done that. And so I explore Greek mythology, a lot, actually. Almost every chapter has something to do with Greek mythology, because at the end of the day, medicine, that's where it all comes from. And so in Greek mythology, they had all these beautiful philosophies about health and healing and our bodies, but we literally have crossed out those important parts of those philosophies and put ourselves as the doctors and the medicines in place of them. I talk about and explore things like childhood trauma. I talk about intergenerational trauma. I talk about toxins, of course. I talk about domestic violence. I talk about all the things that I want to tell my patients that I don't have time to tell them. So instead of saying it's all in your head, can we say what's going on in your life that, could make your immune system low, or what's going on in your diet, what's going on in your lifestyle. And those are the things that nobody asked me. And they're certainly the things that my integrative GP did ask me. And by ruling out everything else, we got to the bottom of it. And I mean, she was lucky, because by the time I got to her, I'd already written half of the book, and I'd already looked at trauma. I'd already tried to explore things like epigenetics, looking at my DNA, looking at, some of the weird and wonderful new theories around health, all the supplements that you can buy that promise to detox you or fix your immune system or make your hair nicer. And that's all sort of the second third of the book. And then the final third of the book is where I start a diary. And that diary starts on the day of the bone marrow biopsy, because I just felt like I needed to document the actual events that happened leading up to hopefully what is the correct diagnosis. So, and since I have had that removed from my mouth, within 3 weeks, my B12 doubled to the point where it was 500. And that's the highest it's ever been. So I don't know. I know there's going to be people that, question this and say, well, it's not a real thing, or, it's just a coincidence, or maybe it was all in your head and now you think you've got a diagnosis, so now you're getting better. I actually don't care about any of that. If that's the case, then I don't mind, as long as I'm getting better and my function is better. That's the most important thing. So the book really, as Mad Hatter MD, for those of you who know the background behind Mad Hatter itself, the Hatters, and this is a well-known thing from hundreds of years ago. Mercury is poisonous, and we have mercury in our mouths, and we tell people not to get mercury fillings or get dental work when they're pregnant. And the Hatters hundreds of years ago were going mad, literally, almost exactly the same way I felt like I was going mad. So that's why they all coined the phrase mad as a hatter. And then you've got the whole Alice in Wonderland thing. And for me, the going down the rabbit hole was going down the rabbit hole of modern day medicine and actually questioning a lot of things and saying, this doesn't seem right. There's lots of things that are wrong with this system. And it's not that my doctors that I saw were, incompetent or did the wrong thing. It's really that the system is just not set up for people to actually explore their health or heal themselves in a way that is actually the holistic way that the ancient Greeks wanted us to do it and the way that they did it. So hopefully it helps a lot of people, and hopefully it helps people who are really struggling with those chronic diseases, and they may get an answer, they may not, but hopefully some of the I have a chapter about psychology and psyche, which is also a Greek mythological term, that talks about where did mental health illness come from? Like, why did we decide something is a mental health disorder versus a disease? So yeah, basically that's the story. So I hope that the message gets across.
So as I said, when I introduced Anita, it's just an incredible journey she's been on. And thank goodness she's documented everything in her wonderful book, Mad Hatter MD, When Medicine Imitates Art. So you can buy a copy of Anita's book at amazon.com.au and find out more about her on her YouTube channel, which is just called Dr. Anita Campbell. Now, if you've been thinking that you might like to write a book yourself, then you can reach out to me at jane@writewithjane.com, and I'll send you through a link to book yourself in for an author strategy session, and you'll be able to ask me any questions at all that you might have about how to write, publish, and promote a book of your own.